Heads up.
Recording in progress.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you, Minister, and welcome to the National Press Theatre. My name is Rachel Haynes, and I'll be moderating today's press conference. Just before we get started, I just want to share a health and safety measure that we have to protect our interpreters. If you are using a headset, please make sure when you're not using it that you keep it on the sticker in front of you. We'll start with the Minister's remarks, then we'll go to the room for questions, and then we'll go online following that. And so I'll hand it over to the Minister. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup et bonjour tout le monde. Bon vendredi. Alors que Post Canada et le STTP négocient depuis plus d'un an, les progrès réalisés sont limités et des divergences importantes demeurent entre les parties. Et ce matin, cela fait près d'un mois que le conflit de travail entre Post Canada et le syndicat perdure. Un mois pendant lequel les Canadiens, d'un océan à l'autre, nos PME, ainsi que celles et ceux vivant dans les régions éloignées, en région dans les communautés autochtones, et entre autres, ont grandement souffert. After months of conciliation and mediation supported by the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, work stoppages, and the subsequent appointment of a special mediator to assist with the negotiation of their new collective agreements, Canada Post and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers remain unable to reach an agreement. Canadians are rightly fed up. Les Canadiens en ont ras-le-bol. En tant que ministre du Travail, j'ai la responsabilité de protéger les Canadiens, l'intérêt public, en maintenant la paix industrielle et en respectant les droits des parties impliquées dans ce conflit. C'est pourquoi je suis ici aujourd'hui pour annoncer que j'apporte une solution pour promouvoir des conditions favorables au règlement de ce conflit de travail et ainsi protéger les intérêts des Canadiens. Not only have the parties been able to show any progress towards an agreement, the federal mediator has now informed me that the negotiations between both parties are now, in fact, going in the wrong direction. So I'm here today to announce that I am applying a solution to promote conditions favorable to the settlement of this labor dispute and protect the interests of all Canadians. Today I've used my powers under the Canada Labour Code. It is my view and the view of the FMCS that the parties are at an impasse. I have asked the Canada Industrial Relations Board, if they also determine that there is an impasse, to order Canada Post and all employees represented by CUPW to resume and continue their operations and duties, and to extend the terms of the existing collective agreements until May 22nd, 2025. During this time, an Industrial Inquiry Commission will be established. Mr. William Kaplan will fill the role of Commissioner. He is an experienced negotiator and has a clear understanding of Canada Post and its union. The Commissioner will be tasked with examining the structural issues preventing the resolution of the current labor dispute. The IIC will be required to submit a report to me and the parties outlining their findings and recommendations by May 15th, 2025. The review could provide the basis of a path forward on how to amend the collective agreements and clarify the structures, rights, and responsibilities of the parties in collective bargaining. The inquiry will have a broad scope, as it will examine the entire structure of Canada Post from both a customer and business model standpoint, considering the challenging business environment now facing Canada Post. Donc aujourd'hui, j'ai utilisé mes pouvoirs en vertu du Code canadien du travail pour intervenir. Je suis d'avis, tout comme le SFMC, que les parties sont dans une impasse. J'ai demandé au Conseil canadien des relations industrielles s'il était du même avis et si, dans l'affirmative, d'ordonner à Post Canada et aux employés du STTP de reprendre et poursuivre leur travail et de prolonger les conventions collectives existantes jusqu'au 22 mai 2025. Pendant cette période, une commission d'enquête sur les relations de travail, la CERT, sera mise en place. M. William Kaplan occupera le rôle de commissaire. Il possède une vaste expérience en négociation et une compréhension approfondie de Post Canada. Le commissaire sera chargé d'examiner les problèmes empêchant la résolution du conflit de travail actuel. Et la CERT devra soumettre aux partis et à moi un rapport contenant ses conclusions et recommandations d'ici le 15 mai 2025. L'examen pourrait tracer un chemin à suivre pour amender les conventions collectives et clarifier les structures, droits et responsabilités des parties dans la négociation collective. L'enquête aura une portée large, car elle examinera l'ensemble de la structure de Post Canada, tant du point de vue des clients que du point de vue industriel, en tenant compte de l'environnement commercial difficile auquel Post Canada est confronté. L'arrêt de travail en cours à Post Canada a des conséquences importantes pour les Canadiens, les entreprises canadiennes et les organismes de charité à travers le pays. It is the government's responsibility to maintain industrial peace, and Canadians must be assured that their government will take all necessary actions to protect them, especially when the safety and prosperity of workers and communities are at risk. I am making this decision to protect the interests of all Canadians. It is not a decision I take lightly, but in this situation, it is the right one. First, the business impacts. During the strike, Canada Post cannot process an estimated 1 million parcels per day. This disruption is particularly detrimental to small and medium-sized businesses, and the economic harm they suffer increases with each passing day. In fact, has accumulated significantly to this date. Second, on charities, direct mail fundraising is a main way of securing critical annual donations, and all this fundraising has been jeopardized during this dispute. The holiday season is the most important fundraising period, with many charities receiving a significant portion of their annual revenue during the final weeks of the year, particularly in December. And let me pause and just say that I invite all Canadians to consider any way they can to support the charities of their choice, and we obviously hope they avail themselves of all possibilities to do so, whether postal or other means. Third, rural and remote parts of Canada. These areas already have limited access to alternative delivery services and are especially vulnerable to the disruptions caused by a postal strike. In some of Canada's most remote regions, Canada Post is the sole delivery provider. Fourth, for Indigenous communities, the strike is having a severe impact, particularly those in northern and remote regions. Indigenous communities in the north that already have significant challenges related to access and infrastructure are disproportionately affected by the disruption in postal services. These communities rely heavily on Canada Post for essential deliveries, including medicine, goods, and resources that are vital for their well-being. The strike worsens existing challenges for Indigenous peoples, making it even harder for them to access goods and services they rely on. It is the only reliable delivery service available for many communities, and the strike further isolates them from essential resources. The government's intervention is critical to make sure that Indigenous peoples are not left behind and they continue to receive the support they need during this difficult period. And fifth, government services. The labour disruption has had a significant impact here as well. Due to the Canada Revenue Agency's heightened document security requirements, there is no possibility of switching to alternative courier services for most shipments. And as a result, more than 1.65 million pieces of personalized correspondence are currently in secure storage awaiting delivery. There are also approximately 190,000 passports at Passport Canada facilities waiting to be shipped. Plusieurs documents essentiels sont aussi retenus en otage durant cette grève. Au Québec, on l'a appris ce matin, et comme ailleurs au pays, il s'agit des documents tels que les cartes soleil, les permis de conduire, les plaques d'immatriculation. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada reports significant backlogs in delivering other critical services, including 50,000 permanent resident cards that are yet to be mailed, disrupting the processing of temporary residence applications. The government is committed to collective bargaining. It's not easy, but we've seen time and time again that it produces the strongest, most enduring agreements to the benefit of workers and employers alike. Je tiens à réaffirmer que les accords négociés sont encore et seront toujours la meilleure façon d'avancer. mais les deux parties doivent être présentes à la table des négociations et être prêtes à négocier. C'est dans cette optique que j'interviens aujourd'hui, pour permettre aux parties de disposer d'une base solide afin qu'elles puissent reprendre les négociations ultimement et parvenir à un accord commun dans les plus brefs délais, une fois que le commissaire aura publié son rapport en mai prochain. Negotiated agreements between the parties in a dispute are the best way forward, but both parties need to be at the table and be prepared to negotiate. It's with this in mind that I am intervening today to make sure both parties have a solid foundation to resume negotiations and reach a mutual agreement as quickly as possible and once the Commissioner publishes his report in May of next year. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Minister. We'll start in the room for questions, and then we'll go online. If you are joining by Zoom, please use the raise hand function so that I know you want a question. We will start in the room with Valérie Gamache.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre. Il y a beaucoup de choses. Premièrement, pourriez-vous clarifier, donc le Conseil des relations de travail va se pencher sur votre demande. J'imagine que vous espérez une reprise des livraisons lundi. Et dans ce cadre-là, est-ce que vous croyez que les cadeaux de Noël qui sont actuellement pris à quelque part dans des entrepôts seront livrés à temps?
Je suis un papa. Je suis quelqu'un de très familier avec les espoirs des enfants canadiens et des familles canadiennes. Et effectivement, avec tout le reste que je viens de souligner, évidemment, on est à Noël. Donc, je vous mentirais si je vous disais que ce n'était pas une considération pour moi. Ceci dit, le CCRI est un organisme, une agence indépendante et prendra les décisions qui s'imposent. Je vais demander qu'ils prennent une décision rapide, mais il y a évidemment une latitude. Ils vont vouloir sûrement entendre les parties et mettre une directive ou la directive qui s'impose s'ils arrivent à la même conclusion que moi, qu'une entente dans les plus brefs délais n'est pas possible, et ordonner la reprise des activités chez Post Canada. S'ils font ça et font ça rapidement, et ce sera encore une fois de leur ressort, j'ai le souhait que les activités reprennent tôt la semaine prochaine.
Et puis, sur cette enquête de 6 mois, c'est assez inusité. Est-ce que je comprends que le commissaire que vous nommez va devoir autant se pencher sur la mission de Post Canada que le conflit de travail?
Oui. Ce sera la commission aura une portée et un champ d'études assez large. Ce n'est pas une surprise pour personne que Post Canada fait face à de nombreux défis. Une industrie qui a connu son lot de changements structurels au niveau de la compétition, au niveau des modèles de livraison. Évidemment, le syndicat a des réflexions sur ce sujet-là. Évidemment, la compagnie, la société a des réflexions là-dessus. Le commissaire pourra les entendre en profondeur, aura toute la capacité et toute la possibilité de faire cela et de nous donner un rapport. Je souligne que M. Kaplan connaît déjà Post Canada pour y avoir servi en tant qu'arbitre, médiateur dans le passé. Il connaît les enjeux. Il est disponible et il est quelqu'un de très connu et très respecté par l'ensemble des acteurs.
Thank you. We'll go to Nick Murray from the Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. I know in your remarks you mentioned that, particularly for small businesses, they make up a large chunk of their revenue in the final weeks of the year. I presume you're thinking Boxing Day sales, but those businesses also have large revenue boosts in the lead up to Christmas as well. So I'm wondering, it might be too late for a lot of businesses to get those sales in, presumably because there's a large backlog of mail now. So I'm just wondering, in hindsight, did the government wait too long to come to this decision?
I'm not unaware. I've obviously, every day, when you're the Minister of Labour, you try and keep your ear to the ground, and I have, to perhaps understate it, heard very clearly from small and medium-sized businesses across Canada, and I understand their frustration. It's a significant time of year for them. It is a significant piece of their own supply and delivery chain that has been affected. We do have a labor code in Canada. It does afford unions the right to strike. They, and they alone, selected the timing of this, they, meaning the parties, so because there's a strike and a lockout in effect, it also must be underscored. And these parties have not reached an agreement on their own for a long, long time. I wanted to give them every possibility of doing that. We devoted every bit of mediation and other resources that we could. I myself have had direct discussions with these parties on many occasions. We wanted to reach a sustainable agreement between these parties, but obviously this week, in fact, as I said in my remarks, the talks took a turn for the worse. So I understand. I have an extreme amount of sympathy for those who have had disruptions to their business and other affairs. Many Canadians have been affected by this work stoppage, and I have acted today to make sure that those effects are attenuated.
Just to dive into that a little bit more, you talk about the mediator saying that the negotiations were going in the wrong direction, which is different language than we've heard in the past as far as the talks going nowhere. Can you elaborate a little bit more as far as what that wrong direction was, and particularly what tipped the needle for you to come to this decision at this point?
Well, I'm not at the table, so I can't comment on, nor is it my role to comment on this respective offers and informal discussions at the table, but suffice to say that positions appeared to have hardened, and it became very clear to me that we were in a total impasse.
We'll go to Rahim Mohammed from National Post.
Minister, are you aware of any discussions either within your ministry or elsewhere in the federal government of any sort of compensation for the small and medium-sized vendors who lost 4 weeks of revenues during, as you mentioned, what for many of these vendors was a peak holiday season?
The law does not envisage compensation for labor disputes. We have, there are labor disputes all over the country at many times that affect different components of the economy. Of course, those structural ones, you've seen me sitting in this very chair before, where the government and I felt we needed to act in the interests of Canadians. But I do remind people that the right to strike, the right to lockout, labor conflicts happen in a democratic and free society, and that those rights are fundamental, and it's part of who we are, and it's part of our DNA.
So this is the third time this year, if you might follow up, that you've had to intervene in this way. Are you worried about what these interventions say about Canada's overarching labor climate and how this labor unrest might play globally to Canada's reputation as a reliable trade and business partner?
This is the first time I've had to intervene in this way, and we've come up with what I think is an imaginative proposal to end the conflict in the near term and provide a path forward to both parties so that they can come themselves to a negotiated agreement. This will make no one happy, by the way, who's at the table. But as Labour Minister, my job is to work for, my bosses are Canadians, and Canadians particularly who are suffering unduly from this dispute. With respect to this question that I get quite often, I would invite those who think strikes are abnormal to look around the world, to the UK, to France, to the United States, where significant and major labor disputes have and are ongoing. Reputationally, what I would say is it's actually a sign of strength that we have collective agreements being signed all the time We're here talking about those who don't get signed or get signed with great difficulty. And that's when I have press conferences. Maybe I should have more press conferences when they happen the old-fashioned way, because there's lots of those. There's been many achieved, in fact, in the past few weeks. So reputationally, I think Canada shines for having a very strong labor management system. Our provinces, the federal government, and those industries in federal jurisdiction are strong. The country is full of promise, and we want to make sure that we have competitive companies with well-compensated, safe, and secure workers. That's what our system is designed to do. That's my job. Make sure we have a great economy that supports the lives and the livelihoods of Canadian workers. And it's an inspiration to me that we have this system that, yes, sometimes requires an intervention like this one, but most of the time provides the best quality of life on the planet to Canadian workers.
Thank you. We'll go to Marina from CBC.
Hi there, Minister. You called this solution imaginative, and my understanding is this is not binding arbitration. So can you explain to Canadians what specifically the government is doing here and how it works?
So we're calling a timeout. We're asking an outside, independent, experienced, veteran arbitrator and now commissioner to examine the structure of Canada Post, examine its collective agreement, examine its arrangements with its employees and its business plans, and come forward with some proposals on the way forward, hopefully proposals after he speaks with the parties, that they can find some reflection of their aspirations within. And so that's why it's imaginative. We don't do this every day. But for reasons of immediacy, we're acting now, and for reasons of sustainability for Canada Post and its employees, we've put this process in place.
So for clarity, I understand the commissioner part, but how are you getting Canada Post workers, as you said, back to work next week? Can you explain to Canadians what that looks like?
Yes, so I have directed the Canada Industrial Relations Board to determine if they see the prospect of a negotiated settlement in the near term, the very near term. If not, if they reach the same conclusion that I have reached quite conclusively, then they shall emit a directive to resume activities at Canada Post and extend the collective agreements till May 22nd.
Thank you. We'll go online now to Marco from iPolitics.
Hey, Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. I wanted to follow up on Marina's question. When it comes to the fact that this isn't ordering binding arbitration, why are you opting for what you've termed this creative solution as opposed to maybe stepping in and with something, a bit more decisive, like imposing binding arbitration?
Well, thanks, Marco. As I answered earlier, it's been a long time since these parties reached an agreement on their own. And there are the profound structural issues that I think everyone is familiar with in that industry and specifically pertaining to Canada Post. So we want to give collective bargaining an opportunity to succeed, but it is clear to me that some more independent thought and examination is required in order to animate the discussions and to motivate the parties to reach an agreement.
And just my follow-up. In terms, the last time a deal was made for Canada Post workers, if I'm not mistaken, it required using back-to-work legislation. It seems like a similar thing happened at the Port of Montreal. Do you think, is this kind of an indication with, you ordering the industrial inquiry that the issues at the table when it comes to Canada Post workers were really significant, and maybe, you didn't anticipate how big the challenge would be when these talks, first started, when the strike first started, excuse me?
Well, they're always significant, and Canada Post negotiations always seem to be difficult negotiations, and these parties have struggled to reach agreements on their own in the recent past for sure. So that's why we applied what we believe is an imaginative solution to trying to assist these parties to reach an agreement and to give them the time needed to perhaps reflect on and obviously advocate for, with this commission, the solutions that they have in mind.
Thank you. We'll go to Laura Osman from The Logic.
Hey, Minister, thanks for taking our questions. Do you have much optimism that things are going to change substantially in the spring and these parties are going to be able to find common ground after this commission is able to put forward recommendations? It seems like the parties are so far apart that even with these recommendations, negotiated solution seems unlikely.
I'm always optimistic, Laura. I believe in the reasonableness of parties and negotiations. I believe that the workers of Canada Post, who, it must be said, have hard jobs, whose work I deeply respect, and I think we all grow deeply affectionate for our letter carriers on an individual basis. They do hard work and sometimes trying circumstances. And Canada Post, I think, does a great job at doing what it does as well. So, I salute the management. They are a very effective. When Canada Post is up and running, of course, it's the pride of postal services around the world. Do I think it will be easy even on May 22nd? No, I do not. The issues are not going away. There are major structural changes in that industry that have to be accounted for. There are workers' aspirations within that industry that have to be accounted for. Those have proved to be interests that are tough to reconcile. So I'm looking to try and triage those issues, have them examined by a veteran and respected leader who will serve as the commissioner, and to propose to the parties a path forward. That's my hope. And as Labour Minister, when I don't see the prospect of an immediate settlement, and when I see the effects that it's having on Canadians and specifically those that I described in my statement, it was time to step in.
Thank you, Minister.
If you remain at an impasse moving forward in the spring, is your government prepared to take greater interventions more quickly to prevent these impacts from recurring once again in a few months?
We're going to follow the plan that I outlined. We're going to have a commission that is going to provide a report that I'm very much hoping will be the basis for a way forward for these parties.
Thank you, Minister. I'm wondering if you have any more time for some questions from the room. Perhaps Valérie will start to go back with her. We haven't had a lot of French questions today.
Oui, non, mais en fait, je trouve la question sur des compensations intéressante. Est-ce que dans le contexte où vous le dites qu'il y a des petites entreprises partout au pays qui souffrent de ce conflit-là, est-ce qu'il y aura possibilité de compensation ou alors est-ce que vous dirigez ces entreprises-là peut-être à s'adresser à Post Canada ou est-ce qu'il y aura des possibilités?
Moi, je suis le ministre du Travail, et ce que je peux vous affirmer, c'est que le Code canadien du travail, la loi pour laquelle je suis responsable, n'envisage pas de compensation dans une situation de conflit de travail, puis c'est le cas depuis très longtemps.
Et dans ce que vous voyez de Post Canada, est-ce qu'il y a des choses que vous voudriez voir, vous, en tant que ministre du Travail, réformer au sein de cette organisation-là? On a souvent parlé, par exemple, de traites bancaires qui pourraient être faits. Est-ce que vous avez des exemples que vous allez donner à votre commissaire pour dire, ben voilà, ce sont des choses qui pourraient permettre de moderniser Post Canada?
Je suis évidemment au courant de nombreux plans et visions pour la mission de Post Canada. Comme ministre du Travail, je n'ai pas de point de vue. Moi, je suis ici pour aider à deux parties d'arriver à une entente collective telles que prescrites par la loi et d'apporter les solutions telles que celles que je vous propose aujourd'hui, qui pourra assurer la paix industrielle au Canada, oui, venir penser les blessures que le conflit a pu imposer aux Canadiens et d'arriver à une entente ultimement qui assurera la viabilité de Post Canada, mais aussi la qualité de vie de ses travailleurs.
Thank you. We'll go very quickly to Nick and hopefully have time for Marina after that.
Yeah, for sure. I don't need a follow-up, but just to follow up on Valérie's question, the answer you just gave her there, I know you mentioned that you don't have a point of view as far as how Canada Post, might look as a business, but in fact, a couple of weeks ago, you told us on the Hill that Canada Post is built to deliver letters, but the Canadians don't send many letters anymore, and that Canada Post has to be transformed into a business that delivers letters in a sustainable way, but also a business that delivers parcels in a profitable way as well. You did weigh in on that side of it, so I'm just wondering if we can flush that out a little bit. Like, what do you see as the vision of how Canada Post might look post this labor dispute?
Well, Parliament has decided that Canada Post must be self-sustaining. So that is a simple mathematical equation. Its revenues and its expenses must, over time, equal each other. And so the other things that you cite are facts. Letter volume has dropped considerably, and there is a parcel market that and particularly a parcel market that Canada Post is uniquely set up to serve, that serves many of the folks that I described, but it's highly competitive, and the structure of that market is one that requires some examination to see how Canada Post can find its way. So I don't think either of those things are particularly controversial affirmations.
Perfect. We'll go quickly to Marina.
I think you mentioned this in French, but what is the timeline for when Canada Post workers might be back delivering people's mails and parcels?
So the board is an independent entity. It will reach its conclusions, I hope, quickly. And if it agrees with the observations that I've shared with you today, then would order a resumption of activities of Canada Post. That could happen as early next week.
Just quickly, you talking about this commissioner. What kind of power will this commissioner's findings have? Will it have the ability to impact negotiations, collective bargaining? Like, what will this person be able to do, or what will a future person be able to do with this information?
Well, all Canadians, they're the owners of Canada Post, and this commission, this Industrial Inquiry Commission, will, needless to say, take into account the visions and the expectations of Canadians with respect to their postal service as well. And everyone gets to weigh in on that. And governments can't be indifferent to that, Canada Post can't be indifferent to that, and CUPW cannot be indifferent to that. So again, this is an exercise meant to provide a well-respected and unbiased view of the activities of the corporation, and particularly the collective bargaining issues, and to provide us with some new inputs that hopefully lead to a deal.
Thank you so much for taking our questions today, Minister, and that'll conclude the press conference.
Merci beaucoup.